Welcome up! In this episode we will talk about Marxian socialism. Coming up. Hello, I'm Understanding Politics, and on this channel I explain political theories and debates to students as well as curious and passionate people, just like you. In the last video about socialism, we talked about utopian socialists, the term that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels used to refer to Saint-Simon, Fourier and Owen, among others. They thought of them as utopian socialists in opposition to their scientific take on the topic. Marxian socialism, or communism, is always a complex topic to present. First, because his philosophy is not simple to decode. And second, because he is often unfairly criticized based on the fact that the Soviet Union was a totalitarian state without basic liberties. I'd like to remind that Karl Marx was a philosopher, possibly one of the greatest, and that his philosophy was far superior to successive implementations of his theories or reinterpretations of his original thought. For Marx, philosophy should not just be abstraction, but a plan of action to modify reality. Marx is hence a political activist, and this is why he wrote with Engels the Manifesto of the Communist Party in 1848 to motivate the proletariat to action. A major idea of his philosophy is indebted to Hegel, the idea of alienation. For Hegel, alienation arises when an individual does not recognize his own spirit in what he or she creates. Artists are the quintessential idea of spirit that turns matter into a work of art inspired by their own soul. Marx went a step ahead in this idea of alienation, arguing that the system of production, relying on the division of labor, makes a worker and his product estranged, and this is what creates the alienation. In dwelling in this idea, we might say that the designer or the person writing the project is the only non-alienated one. Also, this sounds like a defense of a very slow and inefficient mode of production. For Marx, you are what you produce, because the mode of production is the single defining aspect of reality and societies. Based on the mode of production, superstructures and ideologies are defined. As anticipated on the video on ideologies, Marx uses the word ideology as a critique. In his philosophy, ideology is a set of confusing ideas that are used to lie to the people. I totally disagree on this point, of course. Ideologies are a simple system of ideas to interpret reality, and if you agree with Marx, you are just assuming that your ideology is the only good one, and that others are all wrong. Of course, this is the first natural step leading to dictatorships, to impose your standpoint. For Marx, also politics is a superstructure stemming from the mode of production, meaning that all institutions of a state are determined by the way in which economy works in that country. The same goes with culture, including religion. The famous Marxian quote, "Religion is the opium of the masses," stems from the idea that religion is conceived as a mass weapon of destruction to avoid people focusing on the real problem, capitalism. I guess from millennials onwards, we all feel imprisoned by a corporate culture of production that leads to burnout and feeling guilty over getting rest. Does this resonate to you? Still, what is so wrong with this mode of production? Basically, the capitalist, the owner of the means of production, is profiting on the shoulders of his employees. In fact, by explaining how value is produced, Marx shows that work, through time dedicated to an activity, is what transforms raw materials in products having a market value. By owning the means of production, the capitalist gets richer by selling the work of his employees for a majorated market value to consumers. Still, if value comes from the work of the employees, even if the capitalist pays them for their works of labor, they are defrauded of the value that he earns on top of what he pays them. This is the original sin of capitalism, and it is hardly deniable. Even nowadays, what is most striking in how the American capitalist system works is the difference in compensation between managers, CEOs, and average employees. This is undoubtedly unfair, even though the owner assumes the risk of the enterprise. This is why, on average, cooperatives are way fairer than enterprises privately owned. So far, we praised the philosophy of this German Jew from Treviri, but his thought had also major flaws. Firstly, and possibly the worst, he was Hegelian. This means that he thought of history as constituted of different mandatory passages we must go through to reach real liberty and wealth. This is, of course, absolute garbage, because at any step of our history we can involute and regress. Progress is not guaranteed, and most of the times progress is ambivalent, meaning that it is a change bringing both advantages and drawbacks. So, possibly, he was too much of an optimist. In my philosophical understanding of reality, culture, economy, and politics influence each other, but not everything is determined based on how you produce. Secondly, he, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, over-relied on the reasoning capabilities of masses, insisting that rationality will eventually convince everybody to opt for the right decisions. This led to the conviction that his philosophy, that he presented as scientific socialism, was the only right one for society, whereas everything else had to be considered irrational. This is a conviction of the Enlightenment. Think about Robespierre's terror. It is either my way or the guillotine. And Robespierre's work was nothing but an implementation of Rousseau's social contract. Clearly, this conviction of the supremacy of reason in specific philosophies is garbage. Rationality and emotions are never fully separated, and positive emotions can lead to good decisions in the end. Yet it is true that many times right choices exist, and the masses do not opt for them because led by negative emotions, fear of the different, egoism, etc. If you want to learn more on this, I suggest you my playlist on moral politics. In defense of Marx, he was one of the greatest critiques of capitalism, anticipating many of the problems that this system creates also nowadays. Therefore, by reading Marx, you will see how many of the things he discussed back then are more than valid nowadays. Another example stems from his take of historical materialism. While he may have oversimplified history, he also argued that the material condition of the masses is an often overlooked aspect of history. In this sense, Marx's philosophy mirrors the theories of another post-Hegelian philosopher, Ludwig Feuerbach, the one that said, "You are what you eat." Still, he also wished for the dictatorship of the proletariat, a problematic expression that will effectively lead to dictatorial developments in the Soviet Union. But we have to say that he never fully envisioned nor criticized that society, and hence he should not be held accountable for something he never fully analyzed. Moreover, Marx focused his philosophy of action on the United Kingdom, a place where, back then, underage kids were sent to the factories to work for 10 to 12 hours for almost nothing. Nowadays, we realize this is a form of slavery. But back then, this was normal. Do you remember the video on utopian socialism, right? This means that Marx thought socialism should take over in the United Kingdom, where people enduring injustice wanted to change the material conditions of the masses. On the other hand, socialism was often imposed by an intellectual elite in agrarian societies, such as in the former Bolshevik Russia and the China of Mao. In Marx's logic, both these countries did not achieve socialism in the right way because they skipped industrialization, which is why Stalin and Mao forced industrialization at the beginning of their rules. Still, since Marx was not inflexible, he acknowledged that in Russia capitalism could be skipped, because he was convinced that history was on the side of socialism. Again, an optimist. But by not having a capitalism to rebel to, the socialists of those countries did not have a serious sentiment to oppose to the freedom that such liberal systems seemed to promise. Marx never realized that once enjoying capitalism, even the proletariat will aspire to become bourgeois, and instead of opposing it would rather join it. In Western countries, in fact, right-wing parties were often winning the elections because people did not aspire to socialism. Even though it cannot be denied that most of the liberal steps in terms of personal, economic and civil rights would have not been possible without communist and socialist parties requesting them from the oppositions. To conclude, the goal of Marx was not communism, but a society where man is liberated from invisible chains and alienation. Again, this is a strong point of reference of Marxism to Rousseau's social contract. For Marx, communism was a step to go through to reach that goal. In the third volume of The Capital, he wrote, "In fact, the realm of freedom does not commence until the point is passed where labor under the compulsion of necessity and of external utility is required. In the very nature of things, it lies beyond the sphere of material production, in the strict meaning of the term. Just as the savage man must wrestle with nature in order to satisfy his wants, in order to maintain his life and reproduce it, so civilized man has to do it, and he must do it in all forms of society and under all possible modes of production. With this development, the realm of natural necessity expands because his wants increase, but at the same time the forces of production increase by which these wants are satisfied. The freedom in this field cannot consist of anything else but of the fact that socialized men, the associated producers, regulate their interchange with nature rationally, bring it under their common control instead of being ruled by it as by some blind power. They accomplish their task with the least expenditure of energy and under conditions most adequate to their human nature and most worthy of it. But it always remains a realm of a necessity. Beyond it begins that development of human power, which is its own end, the true realm of freedom, which, however, can flourish only upon that realm of necessity as its basis." The lecture is over. Thank you for watching.